right. All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much, Eileen. Thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. I normally would have, or I was planning on starting off this talk by saying happy 119 days till opening day of baseball season, but that may have been a little bit of jeopardy based on the kind of silly decision that the owners and commissioner made today, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. So thanks again to all of you for coming. In particular, I'd like to thank Eileen Crosby and the Holyoke History Room and everyone at the Holyoke Public Library. I'm a professor of library and information science and a librarian by trade. I actually had served in the past as president of the Mass Library Association. So because of my career, I've been around and I've seen quite a few libraries and information centers, libraries, archives, museums, cultural heritage centers. And the Holyoke Public Library is you all from Holyoke should be so incredibly proud of the work that they do. Not only is it one of the most beautiful libraries in the state, just the programs that they put on, the work they do every day is just tremendous. And I can't stress enough how much I feel you all should support that library. So thanks to Eileen. I'm going to start off with So I'm going to start off, I guess, with an invitation and perhaps a slight disclaimer. So my research on this topic has gone on over several years. Did a lot of work in the Holyoke History Room at the public library. It took a trip to the Baseball Hall of Fame library to look at the Jerry Miller papers that at the time he had just donated to the Hall of Fame, and had a good deal of information about the end of the Millers' time in Holyoke. And I did conduct a few interviews, original interviews with folks. So, but having said that, I was born in late September of 1973. Okay, so when the Millers played their first game in 1977, I was 3 years old. From the time the Millers were in Holyoke, I was between the ages of 3 and 9. So when we get to the question and answer session, and there will be one, if there's questions like, hey, do you remember that night that the players were at Nick O'Neill's after the game? I don't, other than, a number of times where I attended games with my family. So I encourage anyone who has personal stories with the Millers, and I see Rocky Hall here. Thank you for coming. I'm sure you could share a few stories as well. So I openly encourage any of you to share that. I feel like this is a work in progress. So for me personally, I guess this story starts in a couple of places. I was, as Eileen mentioned, I was very fortunate, really blessed when I was pursuing my master's degree to complete an internship. I was one of the Frank and Peggy Steele interns at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. It's an incredible program that the Steeles have endowed, and I can't encourage folks enough. If you are in a higher education program or have children or know anyone, they're actually accepting applications for the program for the summer of 2022. It's a really outstanding program. So when I was conducting my internship, one of the big things that they do is they allow you to conduct your own research. And at the time, I was hoping to write a book about Major League Baseball throughout the decade of the 1970s, because it really felt like it was a pretty unique era at a pretty unique time. And I compiled a whole bunch of research, and just as I was sitting down to write, a book came out entitled Big Hair and Plastic Grass, written by a guy named Dan Epstein, which is basically the book that I was hoping to write, except for he did a much better job than I ever could have imagined. It's actually one of my favorite baseball books ever written. And I can't stress enough, it's a great read for anyone who's interested in baseball from that period. But in conversations with the folks at the Hall of Fame, as I was doing this research, I was having a talk with Jim Gates, who was a longtime librarian at the Baseball Hall of Fame. He just retired last year. And one of the things we were talking about at that time was the old, and they really sort of fell out of favor, the old kind of, and I'll show you a picture of one, the old kind of multi-use 60s and 70s ballparks. This is a picture of Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. And they really, so there were several of them. There was the Vet in Philadelphia. There was Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh. Riverfront Stadium. And these were multi-use facilities. They were mostly municipally owned, would host professional baseball, professional football, and concerts, and just general civic events. They were ugly, but it felt like the communities were kind of rolling up their sleeves and trying to do the best they could to provide entertainment for the citizens of their city. So even though they were ugly, I felt that there was definitely a certain amount of charm to them. The unfortunate downside was that they ended up being terrible places to see baseball, not good places to see football, and not good places to see concerts. But there's something I think that was really kind of a different era and something charming about all of that. And Jim said something to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "Your history," and I'm not gonna get the quote correct, but he said, "Your history is your history, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful to you because it's your history, even though it might not have taken place in a pretty location." And that really struck a chord with me. So I chose Riverfront Stadium because, I mean, think about it. So it's this giant concrete bowl, but if you had the privilege, the absolute honor in the mid-70s to watch Pete Rose and Joe Morgan and George Foster and Johnny Bench, the old Big Red Machine just dominating the mid-70s, this is a baseball cathedral to you. This is a beautiful place. So that really got me thinking about, my own history growing up in Western Massachusetts, growing up in East Hampton. And I got to be thinking about going to see the Holyoke Millers as a young person with my family. And I thought of, I guess there was one specific moment of beauty that really kind of struck a chord with me. I was there with my family. We're at a game, probably 1980. I'm 6. We're playing the Buffalo Bisons, and we're sitting on the first base bleachers, and a little lazy pop fly comes our way. My father stands up and catches it barehanded, gets this nice little round of applause from the folks there. Now, of course, to a 6-year-old, this was a line drive rocket that was going to kill all of us. My father dove barehanded and caught the ball and got this raging standing ovation. The Millers players came up, carried him off the field. He was waving to everyone. That was my moment of beauty as a 6-year-old. So it really got me thinking more about the Holyoke Millers and the impact that they had on Holyoke, and just thinking that there probably were other moments of absolute sheer beauty that other people had. So I started to do a little bit of digging, and at the time, I realized that no one had really done a really comprehensive deep dive or history. And this is an older picture of McKenzie. No one had really done a comprehensive history of the Millers at that time, so I got a little bit inspired. Now, this picture was taken from a website called ballparkreviews.com. This picture was taken in 2007, but this is really kind of what McKenzie still looks like in my head. The old bleachers on the first base side. It's not quite the same look as it has now, but this is, when I think of McKenzie Field, McKenzie Stadium, this is what I think of. Actually, most of the Millers research that has been done, really comprehensive research, has really just been released this year. A guy named Kurt Blumenau, who I have never met, recently has published for the Society of Baseball Research, and you can find these online, game reports for both the first ever Millers game in history and the last ever Millers game in history, both of which were played against the Reading Phillies. And they're really, really good reads. They're short reads. I recommend them pretty strongly as well. So that's kind of where what got me sort of down this rabbit hole, and thinking about the Holyoke Millers, and just in hopes that people would remember them. So our story begins not actually in Holyoke at all. Our story begins in many ways in this ballpark, which I'm sure many of you Western Mass folks will recognize. This is Wacona Park in Pittsfield. Very, very famous ballpark, built in 1919, one of the last stadiums where they still have a wooden grandstand. And when it was built in the wrong direction. Now, I say that, let me clarify that if you don't know what I mean. So you can't see it in this picture, but the sun sets directly in the face of the batter, which in 1919, there were no night games, there was no lights. You didn't have to worry about that. The game would be done long before sunset. But it becomes a dangerous situation, and they actually have to have sun delays to ensure that the batter can actually see the pitch and not potentially, well, terrible things could happen. We don't need to talk about that. But it's so this is, so in the 1970s, they hosted, there was a couple of minor league teams, AA teams in the Eastern League that played at Wacona Park. The Washington Senators, before the second incarnation of the Washington Senators, had their AA team in Pittsfield. They were the Pittsfield Senators. And then when that franchise moved to Texas and became the Rangers, the Pittsfield Rangers were there. This was during the period that Billy Martin was the manager of the Major League Texas Rangers. Strangely, the name Billy Martin is going to come up a few times tonight, so watch this space. He strangely has a few connections to the Holyoke Millers. And in 1976, the Rangers had left, and they were replaced by the Milwaukee Brewers as the Major League affiliate. So the Berkshire Brewers played in Wacona Park in 1976. At the end of the season, and Wacona Park is municipally owned, it was discovered that there were major structural issues to the stadium that were estimated to run in the $500,000 range, the $500,000 range. The renovations actually ultimately, when they did happen, ended up being closer to $750,000. It actually, they were more than $700,000. So in 1976, and for a municipally owned stadium, that's a heck of a lot of money now. That's a tremendous amount of money at that time. So the chances of that money being approved were very, very slim to have it done and have the repairs be done in time, enough time for the 1977 season. So the Berkshire Brewers franchise basically was without a home, and they had to figure out a place to play in the 1977 season. So enter this guy. This man is named Pat McKernan. He was president of the Eastern League from 1974 to 1982. And to show you how different the world of professional baseball was, so he was the president of the Eastern League from 74 to 82. He was also the president and general manager of the Albuquerque Dukes, who were a AAA team in the Pacific Coast League from 79 until 2000. So for 3 years, he was the president of a AA league on the East Coast and president and general manager of a AAA team in New Mexico. I don't know how it kind of blows my mind, but that just kind of shows you how different the world was then. So before he was president of the Eastern League, he actually had been the owner and general manager of the Pittsfield franchise. And he was really kind of an old school Bill Veeck type of, carnival barker, minor league executive or minor league owner. He was a very large man. He weighed about 350 pounds. And one of his promotions that he would have is he would go on, he'd call him a daily hunger strike. So if they hadn't drawn 500 fans for a game, he would refuse to eat for the entire day. Again, different times, I suppose. So he did that. He also very famously was married at home plate of Wacona Park between games of a doubleheader, which, as that's coming out of my mouth, I'm realizing my wife is in attendance here, and I may have just identified her absolute worst nightmare of her entire life. So anyways, but that's Pat McKernan. He is the president of the Eastern League, and he basically he decides to try to help facilitate the moving of the Brewers franchise somewhere somewhat locally in Massachusetts. Now, multiple sources who I interviewed throughout the course of this told me, quite frankly, that Holyoke was never really considered at that time a long-term minor league city. They were focused on Springfield, who had hosted the Springfield Giants for many years before Pinchin Park had burned down. And ultimately, that was sort of like their long-term goal was to go to Springfield. Springfield at this time didn't have the capacity or was not interested in hosting a minor league team. Holyoke, right nearby, however, at the time was. And McKernan basically had met with city aldermen and with Mayor Prue to talk about bringing a minor league franchise to Holyoke. Now, at the time, Holyoke's in a little bit of a down and out period. The unemployment in the city in 1975 was listed at almost 17%. So I think they were willing to kind of roll the dice on an endeavor that might turn things around a bit in the city. Now, also at the time in the mid to late 70s, it was estimated that if your city had a AA franchise, that would basically be the equivalent of about $250,000 in tourist revenue, people eating at restaurants, going to bars, et cetera. So it was something that the city decided to, kind of roll the dice on. The dollar range that was given to bring the Millers to Holyoke was between $65,000 and about $110,000, $108,000, with $91,000 being really the number that would be necessary to bring McKenzie and its renovated up to an acceptable level to host an Eastern League franchise. So some of the things that were listed on the list of renovations were refurbishing the locker rooms. There was no concession stand, as it was the ball field for Holyoke High School. So there wasn't a central place where people could, buy hot dogs and beer and peanuts and Cracker Jack, et cetera. So that had to be built. And other things that were talked about were possibly resodding the fields. And at the time, there was a cinder running track that ran through the outfields. One of the things on the higher level dollar amount was to remove the track from the outfields. Now, this track is going to come back again later in the story, so hang in there. This was a significant thing. So ultimately, city officials were able to agree on the low end number, on the $65,000 number. So it was enough to get McKenzie up to an acceptable 1977 level of quality for an Eastern League franchise, which is really, really sort of fascinating just to think about how much the economics of baseball and minor league baseball has changed so much. You think about Dunkin' Donuts Park in Hartford, where the Yard Goats play. That is a multi-million-dollar facility. That's at the exact same level that the Millers played at McKenzie Field, McKenzie Stadium. So just the difference, it's really kind of staggering. So with $65,000 on December 21st, 1976, and we're coming up on the 45th anniversary of that, the city alderman voted 11-4 to transfer that money to the city parks department to renovate McKenzie Field, and a new franchise pro baseball team was coming to Holyoke. We did it. We have a team. The 1977 season starts with a bit of an extended road trip. It was by design. The Millers played their first 9 games of their existence actually on the road. The opening series is in Reading against the Phillies. The reason why they played all the games on the road was to give the city park department some time to finish what they needed to do to McKenzie to make it acceptable. So they started off, traveling quite a bit. Their first game, and again, Kurt Blumenau's game recap is really good read. Was on a Friday night in Reading. Weather had been kind of lousy in the early spring. They only drew 470 fans for the game. What kind of became a common theme that season, and particularly on that opening road trip, the Millers got off to a 4-0 lead, and were ahead 4-0 through 6 innings, and gave up 8 runs in the 7th. 7 of the runs were unearned. Gary Hawley, the first baseman, made an error, and they ended up blowing the lead. They started the road trip out 2-9. 2 of the games in Reading, they had 4-0 leads and blew them. They also had a 6-0 lead in one of the games, and the bullpen was not able to manage that. So they start on the road, and eventually that 9-game road trip ends, and they're home, finally, opening night in Holyoke. The first time pro baseball will be in Holyoke since the Holyoke Papermakers left in 1913. So 64 years between professional baseball in the city of Holyoke. So let's see. Let me just grab my notes here real quick. So they were scheduled to open on Sunday, April 24th, 1977. It was supposed to be a Sunday afternoon game against the Waterbury Giants. That game actually ended up being rained out. And I mentioned in my article that maybe it was a little bit of a blessing. 1977 was certainly the heyday of Mountain Park was gone, but still it was a significant enough attraction. And the great Larry Chesky Orchestra were playing at Mountain Park that afternoon. And anyone who is a polka fan, Larry Chesky's in the Polka Hall of Fame, just wonderful ensemble, and a big local draw at that time. And I guess the thought of the first game of pro baseball in Holyoke in 64 years, if there's an attendance conflict between a polka show, that might not exactly look super inspiring. But that game was rained out. The next night they have their home debut. So it's a Monday night at McKenzie. About 2,500 fans show up. The Millers, it's actually the exact opposite of the road trip. The Millers fall behind 5-0. Stage this great comeback. They end up tying the game at 5, and they end up unfortunately losing 7-5. So here's the opening night lineup at McKenzie that night. So Ike Blessing was the designated hitter, and he ended up having the big hit of the night. He hit a 2-run homer in the 7th inning to tie the game at 5, and he pulled it down the left field line. Now this is in the days before. So currently McKenzie has the bullpens out in left field, so it's a bit shorter of a poke. McKenzie used to really be a tremendous park to hit the ball out of. So he was probably about a 400-foot shot that he hit out to left field to tie the game. Brought the fans to their feet, and unfortunately they were not able to pull it out from there. So let's talk about a few of the folks who were in this opening day lineup. So Eddie Romero was the starting shortstop for the Millers that night. He was a 19-year-old kid at the time, from Puerto Rico, and he was considered sort of a mid-level prospect, and something really kind of incredible and remarkable happened to him that season. So it was almost like a perfect storm happened in Milwaukee, that they had just a tremendous rash of injuries to basically all of their main infielders. Robin Yount went on the disabled list. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. Don Money also went on the disabled list at this time. Don Money is someone, whenever I hear that name, I have to laugh, because there was a book that came out about 20 years ago called Oh Holy Cow, the found poetry of Phil Rizzuto. Basically what the book is about is kind of towards the end of Rizzuto's announcing career. He's maybe starting to lose a little bit on his fastball, I guess, to put it mildly. People would take his actual game calls and fashion them into like E.E. Cummings type poems. It's a really, really fascinating read. And one of the poems is called Time and Money. And it's basically Rizzuto's call. Don Money's at the plate, and he tries to call timeout, and the umpire doesn't grant him time, and Rizzuto goes crazy. Oh, Money's calling for time. Money's calling for time. Really kind of it's kind of an existential thing, I suppose, that money can buy you a lot of things in this world, but I guess it can't buy you time. Think about that one. Anyways, and the other infielder that went on the disabled list was Tim Johnson. So Johnson, you may remember, was briefly the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays and was fired a little bit unceremoniously on it was accusations of a stolen valor speech that he gave to his team. There were reports that said that he told his team about a time when he was a soldier in Vietnam and what they did, trying to inspire the team, and which is, anyone who's been in the service knows that's as cardinal sin as you can get, is to claim that you served when you actually didn't. He was fired kind of quickly, and it's been debated over the years. He has said that he was just trying to make an analogy. He never actually claimed that he served, but the damage was done. So that was more or less his story. Local connection, his nephew, Matt Johnson, is actually a pretty well-known local artist based out of East Hampton. If you've been through downtown East Hampton in recent years and you see any of the metal sculptures that are around downtown, if you see like a bike rack, metal bike rack that's shaped like a guitar, or a bike rack that says 01027 based out of that's made out of metal, those are creations of Matt Johnson. And his uncle was an infielder for Milwaukee in 1977. So all these guys, sorry, tangent, all these folks get hurt. Eddie Romero is 19 years old, playing at the AA level. It's an absolute emergency. So he gets called up. Matt Galante, who was the manager of the Millers at the time, literally wakes him up and is like, Eddie, you got to get on a plane out of Bradley in however many hours. They need you, they need you in Milwaukee tonight. And of course he thought it was a joke. Eventually he does fly out. He has a 10-day span with the Brewers. His first game, he goes 0 for 2. He walks twice. They're playing against Baltimore. Next game up, he goes 3 for 3, drives in the game-winning run, scores Jim Wolford to win the game. And the Sporting News actually does a pretty big article about it at the time because it's so unheard of. Someone so young, someone coming up from the AA level, not necessarily considered a huge prospect, wins an important game, but an important in-division game for the Millers. So that was more or less his moment in the sun in 1977. He ends up having a very, very solid, lengthy major league career. You might remember he was a member of the 1986 Red Sox team that won the pennant. He actually played in two of the more important games of that season. He was a late inning defensive substitution in the playoffs. No, he was not supposed to replace Bill Buckner at first base. That was Dave Stapleton. But he would come in. He actually ended up playing in the famous Game 5 in Anaheim against the Angels, where Dave Henderson hit the home run to tie the game. He was a defensive substitution in that game. He also was a defensive sub. And this is my young man Red Sox fan coming out in the horrible Game 7 against the Mets. And Eddie actually popped out for the first out of the 9th inning. He pops out to Keith Hernandez, and the Red Sox go on to lose. But in 1977, he's one of ours in Holyoke. So there's Eddie Romero from the Millers opening day roster. Ike Blessing, I mentioned earlier, hit that home run in the first Millers home game. So this is a picture of him in 1972 with the Detroit Tigers. Now it's kind of funny. The AA level, in a lot of ways, is considered, and I'm looking at Rocky Hall. I see you on my screen. Feel free to chime in on this later if I'm off base with this. The AA level is considered in a lot of ways kind of like a make or break level in the minor leagues. That younger prospects will come up, and the executives and the scouts will kind of get a chance if they do have potential to be able to hit major league pitching by the AA level. Ike Blessing had already been in the major leagues and was on his way down at this point. So it's a kind of a funny story. So he had been, a high school superstar in Michigan. He was a 4-star athlete, drafted by the Tigers, considered a pretty good prospect. He comes up at the end of the 1972 season for a cup of coffee. He plays, he either plays 4 games and has 5 at-bats, or he plays 5 games and has 4 at-bats. He doesn't get a hit. I forget which one of the two. It's one or the other. But he doesn't get a hit in the handful of at-bats that he has. So in spring training the next year, he's considered a potential, prospect to make the major league team. Now, the manager of the Tigers at the time is Billy Martin. There's that name again. So in the early 70s, it definitely seems like the commitment to things like weight training, sports nutrition, et cetera, isn't quite at the same level that it is currently. I have vivid memories of watching Carl Yastrzemski smoking cigarettes between innings of games. Again, it was a different time. So in Lakeland, Florida, in spring training, Ike and a few of the Tigers players end up going out to a bar in the evening and having a few drinks and having a good time. So as Blessed is leaving, he ends up getting into an altercation with another man in the parking lot. Billy Martin's his manager. He's inside the bar. He hears about this. He comes out to try to break up the fights, the potential fight that maybe was going to come to happen. Now, Billy Martin is known for several things. He was known for being, one of the great baseball minds, one of the great managers of all time, really. Unfortunately, he was also known for having a bit of a temper, and really, unfortunately, he was known for having a bit of a drinking problems and tempers. I'm probably not speaking out of school. I'll say, often go kind of hand in hand. So the story in this case goes, in this case, it's a good thing that Billy Martin's at the bar. There's many other times where it's not good, where he's at the bar. Billy Martin famously was fired for getting into a barroom brawl with a marshmallow salesman in Minneapolis. But this is a good time that he's there. So he comes out and tries to calm things down. In the interim, or as this is happening, the police show up, according to stories, according to reports, to see what's going on with the altercation. The police decide to arrest Blessing, and according to reports, make some really unnecessary and really unfortunate racial slurs at him. And this is what causes Billy Martin to basically flip out in defense of his ball player. Martin ends up getting arrested also at that time. And it's sort of there's been questions throughout the years as to whether this was that night was sort of a defining moment in Blessing's career. He never really got a sniff of the majors again after being considered a pretty good prospect. The first I'd ever heard of this story was actually from someone from Holyoke who had said, oh yeah, Ike Blessing, Billy Martin blackballed him and cost him his career. I've heard that story. I've also heard the story that, like, well, man, if you're in an altercation and Billy Martin's the good guy, how much has the cheese slipped off the cracker in this instance? Maybe this isn't, maybe our organization isn't going to take a chance on you. Either way, unfortunately, that was his last chance. That was his last time playing Major League Baseball. Ike Blessing has been involved in baseball for years and years since. He runs youth camps in the Detroit area. He's kind of an ambassador for the Tigers. He won the most popular there was a contest for the most popular Miller in 1977, and he won it pretty much running away. Seems like he was a great guy, and seems like was kind of in a wrong place, wrong time at that instance in Florida. So there's Ike Blessing. I can't kind of go through talking about the Millers in 77 without talking a little bit about Danny Thomas, although he never actually played for the Brewers. I keep saying Brewers when I mean Millers. I apologize for that. It's an easy, well, anyways. So Danny Thomas was considered a very large prospect for the Milwaukee Brewers in the mid 70s. He unfortunately suffered from some very severe mental health issues. And one of the things that he did when he was trying to ground himself and kind of trying to get his life together was he joined a church that forbid any activities from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. So he's considered a huge prospect, but you have to consider that in 1977, you always, and still even to this current day, Major League teams will always play on Friday night. They'll often play on Saturday afternoon as well. So there's two games that he is not able to participate in based on his religious beliefs. He's a great prospect. He comes up with the Millers and has a really lights out start to his 77 season. But again, it's and looking at the rookies who are on this card, Rupert Jones had a solid long career. Jack Clark was the Ripper. Lee Mazzilli, big fan favorite in New York. Kind of Hollywood heartthrob player, one of the most popular Mets of all time. Danny Thomas was right there as a prospect on that level with all of them. So the Brewers needed to make room because they had some pitching injuries, and they sent Thomas down to AAA, and it kind of sent him in a bit of a downward spiral psychologically and mentally. So he was hitting at one point, he was hitting over 300 for the Brewers. He was probably down to about 280, 285 at the time of his demotion. And he became really, really very depressed. And he was basically hitting under 200 for the AAA affiliate. And they were going to send him down to Holyoke to play for the Millers. And he refused to report. He was like, if I go down another level, that's going to continue me down a downward spiral. He actually also never played pro ball again. He was released by the Brewers at the end of the year, tried to make a comeback playing with semi-pro teams. No major league teams would take a chance on him mostly because of the, he could only play from Sunday through Thursday factor. The story sadly ends in 1980. He committed suicide while in prison. It's a really sad story, but he's someone that I feel kind of gets forgotten about in baseball history, and it's he definitely had an impact and could have been someone. So he wasn't a Miller, but he was assigned there and potentially could have been. Part of me wonders what would have happened if he had reported, how much his life might have potentially been different. You never know. So Tom Kaiser is another name that's going to come up frequently throughout this story. He is, in this picture, he's 24 years old, and he's the general manager of the Millers at this time. So he was also kind of a disciple of Pat McKernan as far as various promotions, the promotions in minor league baseball that are kind of one of the things that we all come to know and love about minor league baseball. One of his big promotions that he had during the first season was something they called Mustache Nights. That if the Millers drew more than 1,500 fans for the game, he would, in a ceremony after the game on the field, have his mustache shaved off. They ended up drawing about over 2,000 fans for the game. His mustache was shaved, and he ended up being kind of a very, very, very significant figure for the Millers. Other promotions that they had in that first season, they had a guaranteed win day, where if you went to a game, say the game was on Tuesday nights and the Millers win, you have free admission to the next game the following night on Wednesday night. A few other promotions they had that first year. Bob Feller was a guest at McKenzie. Max Patkin, the Clown Prince of Baseball, was also there for a promotional night, and they proposed and were potentially going to have a beer night promotion, but that never came to fruition, which I'm guessing that the Holyoke police probably were kind of pleased about that, based on what happened at 10 Cent Beer Night a couple of years earlier in Cleveland, where drunken fans attacked Jeff Burroughs in right field for the Rangers, and the Rangers dugout, again led by Billy Martin, went out with bats to try to defend their teammate. So, anyways, it's just all part of the atmosphere. So the Millers actually have a very good season in 77. They end up finishing 13 games out of first, but they finished 78 and 61. They draw over 60,000 fans. It's considered a huge success all in all. 78 seasons where things take a little bit of a step back for them. The team isn't quite as good. The team finishes below 500. And you all from New England in 1978, of course, remember one of the major events of the year was, of course, the blizzard of 78, which happened in February of that year. Now, mind you, the baseball season starts in April, but that storm was so devastating. And frankly, it was such a very, very windy and cold and snowy and rainy spring that it had a really tremendously negative impact on attendance that year. They had their home opener on April 16th. Mayor Prue threw out the first pitch, bounced it a couple of times before getting to home plates. Kind of typical for the pitching staff that year. They had the worst pitching in the Eastern League. Mayor Prue maybe could have helped them out. I don't know. And like I said, attendance was just really, really low. The Mustache Night promotion drew 300 fans instead of 1,500 fans. There's multiple times where they're drawing like in the 200s and 300s. Part of it is the weather. Part of it, the team isn't as good. Part of it is maybe just a little bit of the novelty of it has worn off. So 78 is a little bit of a step back. There's a few folks who are standouts on the 78 team. Jeff Urak is one of them, and Peggy Boulay, I'm sure, would probably not talk to me again if I didn't mention her favorite player, Jeff Urak. He actually won MVP of the Eastern League that year, and he ended up hitting 322, I believe 21 home runs. Ends up having a really, really excellent season. He does end up going up and again having about 4 or 5 at bats in the majors, and that's it. But he has a really tremendous year for the Millers and is one of the really kind of lone bright spots. Marshall Edwards is also a prospect. His two siblings had already been major league players. He actually ends up having a really, really strong start to the season. He has a 14-game hitting streak early in the year. He's definitely very speedy on the base paths. And he ends up going on and having a pretty solid major league career with Milwaukee and a couple other folks. So he was another bright spot on the 78 team. So we skip ahead to 79. And Rocky, I'm sorry you're not in this picture, but I'm sure we'll hear some more. We'll hear some more from you in a little bit. So 79, the team improves by a few wins, and probably about 3 or 4 more wins, and probably about 3,000 or so more people in attendance at games. So it's small incremental improvements, but at this time, there's definitely a change in the air. Harry Dalton had been hired as general manager of the Brewers. At that time, he was considered one of the really, really smart young general managers in baseball and was the architect of the Harvey's Wallbangers teams of the early 80s of the Brewers. The team in 1982 that ended up winning the pennant and losing to the Cardinals in the World Series. So we're starting to see more top prospects coming through Holyoke at this time. Kevin Bass is one of the most noteworthy ones, probably the most noteworthy one, who made his debut in Holyoke in 1979. He ends up having a very solid major league career with the Houston Astros and a couple other teams. He is known, unfortunately, he was an all-star in '86 on the Astros team that won the National League West Division, and the 16-inning Game 6 that they lost to the Mets to put the Mets in the World Series. Kevin Bass unfortunately struck out to end the game. So that was kind of one of his big major league moments. But he's a young star in Holyoke in 79. He hits in the 260s that year. He has 8 home runs. Again, he's very young. It's sort of the tip of the iceberg of what's going to come down the line for him in the following year and in the future in the majors. And of course, it is the first time, and I say this, that at my age in 1979, I'm 7 years old. The San Diego Chicken is about as A-list of a celebrity as you can get. So the Chicken makes his first appearance ever in Holyoke. That definitely adds to the attendance numbers going back up. The night that the Chicken was in Holyoke, there was 6,300 fans at the game. Capacity at McKenzie was only 4,100. I don't know where they put everyone, but again, when you have a star like the San Diego Chicken in town, you do what you can to make sure things happen. So we'll hear more about the 79 season, I'm sure in a little bit, but I guess I'm looking at the time here. 1980 rolls around, and 79 season was slight improvements from previous years, and the 1980 season is really the high water mark for the Holyoke Millers. They have a team that is absolutely stacked and is considered arguably the best pro team that's ever played in Western Mass. And I say that I say arguably because the Springfield Giants in the 50s and 60s had the Alou brothers. They had Juan Marichal. A number of legendary players came through Springfield at that time. But all reports, say that this Holyoke team, this 1980 Holyoke team, was as good, or certainly would battle with any of those teams at any time. Right before the start of the 1980 season, though, Spike Herzig, who was the owner of the Millers at the time, sells the team to Tom Kaiser, who had been the general manager. The sale's announced 24 hours before opening day. Kaiser's 27 years old. He's one of the youngest owners in all of professional sports at the time. He was given really very much a hometown discount because he was committed to Holyoke and making sure that the team stayed in Holyoke. It's staggering to think about this. Kaiser bought a AA-level professional sports team for $35,000. I mean, it's really unfathomable. The value of the franchise was probably closer to the $50,000 range. But again, because Kaiser was so committed to keeping the team in Holyoke, Herzig decided to sell the team to him, knowing that he would keep them in town. The big name, so there's many future major leaguers who play for the Millers. Steve Lake, Chuck Porter, Doug Jones, who had a great career with the Cleveland baseball franchise, who just passed away, I believe, a week and a half ago. Was a member of this team. Frank DePino, who had a really solid major league career as a reliever. The big name that summer, though, was David Green. David Green's father was considered arguably the best player to ever come out of, and I'm blanking on where he's from right now. This is kind of embarrassing. It's not Venezuela. Anyways, very, very strong, very huge prospect at the time. 5-tool star, could do anything, could run, could throw, could hit for power, could hit for average. He was a superstar in the making. The unfortunate thing that became known about David Green was that the summer that he was in Holyoke, being a superstar and being a 19-year-old prospect, and I'm always very hesitant because there's so much uncertainty around so many players who come from Latin American countries. So it's often easy to say like, oh, well, so-and-so lied about their age, etc. It did come out later that in 1980, David Green was probably 25, closer to 26 years old, rather than being 19. So this superstar that seemingly had kind of an unlimited ceiling. He was considered the next Roberto Clemente. He had been called that many times. Was actually a player who had kind of was starting to hit his peak already. And I don't know, I have to say, I'm always a bit frustrated when young players are given labels like the next so-and-so, like the next Roberto Clemente. There's only one Roberto Clemente, folks. And there's nothing wrong with being the best David Green that you can be. So he was one of the stars of that team, and just at the time considered with such great potential. So the Millers run away with their division, and then they eventually play the Waterbury Reds. So they beat Buffalo in the Eastern Conference Championship, and then they take on the Waterbury Reds and beat them 7-0 in the championship game. Chuck Porter was the winning pitcher. Doug Lohman doubled, tripled, and hit a homer. He was a single away from hitting for the cycle. David Green got 3 hits that night. They were just a really emphatic champion, and it was just a huge, great night. I have friends who were there that night. I was not there that night, telling me about dancing on top of the dugout to "We Are Family" playing over the PA. So the Holyoke Millers are champions of the Eastern League, just 3 years into the franchise being born. Just great moment in the city history, period, in any aspect of the city history. So 1980, definitely the high water mark for them. 1981 rolls around, and at the end of 1980, the Brewers decide they don't like the cold weather in Massachusetts. They're frustrated with the cinder track in the outfield. They decide to move their players from Holyoke to El Paso, Texas, and quickly the California Angels come in as the affiliate for the Holyoke Millers. So it's actually kind of a funny season. They're still wearing the old Brewers colors, the blue and gold, and still have the same logo, but they're associated with the California Angels at that time. So is that Urak? Awesome. That's great. So 81 rolls around, and so it's a whole new team. So the players that the Holyoke fans have come to know for the last couple of years, really kind of fall in love with, aren't there anymore. There's still some top prospects that come through Holyoke in the 81 season, even though that doesn't translate to as many wins on the ball field. Dennis Rasmussen ends up having a pretty solid major league career, pitches for the Yankees for a couple of years, wins 18 games, I believe, in 1986 for the Yankees. In 1980, he's in Holyoke, living in, according to him, living at the foot of Mount Tom in what he believed was, he was living in an RV in what he believed was an illegal trailer park. I don't know exactly where it was located. I'm assuming it's probably on the Route 5 side, but it kind of just shows you the sort of ridiculous state of minor league baseball. This guy's living in an RV in a place where he shouldn't be living, and he's a professional ball player, ends up having a solid major league career. Gary Pettis, who is currently a coach for the Houston Astros, also comes through Holyoke at this time. He steals 55 bases in 1981, has a pretty solid year for them. He ends up having a really solid major league career for the California Angels, the Detroit Tigers, a few other teams. Has a really, really good season for the Millers. Gussie Polidor also is a prospect that plays a bit for California, has a few years playing for the California Angels. I'm including him because he was 19 from Venezuela, and the Millers were in Buffalo playing the Bisons, and the team has an off day, and about 15 of them decide to take a bus trip to Niagara Falls, and they end up going over to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. As they're crossing back over the border, an immigration agent stops their bus, gets on, and checks, pretty much asks where everyone is from, asks for their passports, etc. Polidor is 18, speaks very little English, and had forgotten his passport. He had left his passport with his host family that he was staying with, didn't have him. He's pulled off the bus, he's detained, and not able to get back into the country. Again, how much the world has changed. So the Millers, the players call his host family. They are able to get his passport. Tom Kaiser, who's the owner, is going to drive out to Buffalo to try to give it to him, because he figured if it was shipped out or flown out, it might not get there in enough time. Meanwhile, the Buffalo Bison's organization is able to reach out to Border Patrol, and they were able to get Polidor released just on hey, he's a pro ball player. He's playing against us this weekend. I really can't imagine something happening. I can't imagine that transaction happening so quickly these days, but definitely kind of a stressful moment on his life, but ends up having a solid little career as a utility infielder around the majors. And Daryl Miller was also on this team. Daryl Miller, again, has, like Polidor, has a solid career as a utility player, as a catcher and an outfielder for the Angels. You are probably all more familiar with his two siblings. This is also another local connection, I suppose. Daryl Miller has a brother, Reggie, and a sister, Cheryl, who are both members of the Basketball Hall of Fame. Reggie Miller having a great career with the Indiana Pacers, and his sister Cheryl being, considered arguably one of the best women's basketball players that ever lived. But Daryl played for the Millers for a couple of seasons. He's actually a minister now out in California, and doing really, really well for himself. So, but here he is in Holyoke playing for the Millers. So at the end of the 81 season, another thing happens. Tom Kaiser is given a job in the front office of the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's kind of an offer that he can't refuse. Kaiser actually ends up being a really good move for him to sell the Millers. He ends up being the president of the Texas League, a AA league, for about 25 years. He just recently retired a couple of years ago. So he really kind of had no choice, even though I think his whole intention was to stay in Holyoke as long as he could. They show him the money, I guess, and he decides that he has to move along. So strong commitment again is to try to find people who would buy the team with the intention of keeping them in Holyoke. They had over 30 offers for the team, potential ownership groups from Florida, from California. There was a group from Holyoke that tried to buy the team, but they were unsuccessful. They weren't able to pull it off. And the new owners actually end up being some local folks. So the people in this picture from left to right, that's Dr. Jerry Malure, who was a political science professor at UMass for many years. George Como, who was a colleague of his. He worked at the computer science department at UMass. And on the right is Ben Cerner, who has made a career for himself locally in heating oil. You still see the Cerner oil trucks all around the area, even though he's retired. He's no longer participating in the business. So these three folks end up purchasing the team with the intention of keeping them in Holyoke long term as best as they can. I spoke with Dr. Miller several years back. He passed away a few years ago, but he told me that they really didn't have an intention of moving the team away. And again, to go back to the earlier point about when the team first came here, they were thinking that if they couldn't work in Holyoke, they wanted to move the team to Springfield if possible. So there would be minor league baseball in Western Massachusetts. That wasn't really able to be the case. So these folks buy the team at the end of 1981, and they kind of stumble out of the gates a little bit. They go to the winter meetings, and Joe Busas, who's a pretty well-known at the time minor league executive, just kind of reads them a riot act because these guys aren't establishment baseball guys. And actually he corners Jerry Miller and is like, what the heck, and quote unquote, what the hell does a political science professor, want to do? What do you want to own a baseball team? And he said, look, we're just big fans. I'm a big fan. Dr. Miller actually ended up writing a couple of books about his experience growing up as a St. Louis Cardinals fan. He ends up actually sticking with the team throughout the entire existence of the franchise. I'll get to that in a little bit. So we opened the 1982 season again with a new ownership group and many new players. Unbeknownst to anyone, and unbeknownst to the owners, actually, a young author decides to move to Holyoke and becomes a season ticket holder for the Millers, and bases a murder mystery around the 1982 Holyoke Millers season. Dominic Stansbury, who has had a kind of a mid-level career as a mystery author, wrote his first book, The Spoiler, based on the Holyoke Millers. The book I've read it. It's pretty good. It's been out of print for several years. I guess the Millers have been out of print for several years too. So I guess that's sort of fitting. But no one was aware that this was happening. This book actually ended up being published, I believe, in 1986 or 1987. So it was a few years afterwards. And when I met with Dr. Miller, he actually had no idea that this book was even in existence. So that happens during that season. And one of the things is, so the first person that they hired to be their general manager, it just really doesn't work out with him. It's a new ownership group, and they're trying to bring in as much early revenue as possible. And then one of the big things that generates revenue for minor league teams is the billboards that are out in the outfields. And one of the jobs of a general manager, if you're a general manager of a minor league team, you have to do lots of different things. You have to wear a whole lot of hats or caps. The breaking point, I guess, was that there was a local car wash company that the general manager agreed they would have a billboard in center field, like one of the prime billboards, not for any money, but in exchange for giving free car washes to the players. And the owners were just like, you can't do that. We actually need to get money to operate the team. So he ends up being fired. Another general manager is brought in. He's fired also. At the time, a lot of the stuff that was written was said that the ownership group was kind of not fully competent, or at least not as competent as the past owners had been. So that was definitely sort of like the other big issue is that again, going back to the cinder track in the outfields, there's definitely some contention between the owners of the team and the city of Holyoke. And it goes back, I guess, to the question of, our pro franchises, our pro sports franchises, are they public trusts or are they independent businesses? And it's something I think that we still struggle with to this day. McKenzie was a municipally owned park. The city wanted the local high school. I mean, it's the ball field for Holyoke High. So Holyoke High should have access to the fields. It became a bit of a stumbling block that not only was the track team at Holyoke High and Holyoke Catholic given priority over the Millers, but high school baseball games and high school baseball practices were given priority over the Millers. Again, the city thought that it was the city's field and all members of the city should be able to use it. The Millers thought that it was the Millers' field, and because they're a professional franchise, they should have priority to it all the time. I don't know what the right answer is personally, and I'm not going to claim to have the right answer on that, but that's where that was really ends up being the big stumbling block. And I have to confess, I never met Mayor Prue, and I never met Mr. Cerner. Based on what I've read, it seems like their two personalities just were not a very good mix. It seemed like they had a bit of a frosty relationship that became more and more difficult to manage as time went on. So public meetings that normally were cordial became more and more confrontational, and it's sort of a breaking point between the city and between the team. And again, it was, pretty well covered in the local papers. Local elected officials thought the Millers should try to, play nice. The Millers thought that the city should play nicer. Again, I don't know who's right. I don't know who's wrong. This is just what happened. So the ownership group starts entertaining offers from other cities. Nashua, New Hampshire emerges as the leading contender. Nashua has to, much like in Holyoke, they have to agree to appropriate money for upgrades to their ballpark. And another thing that was a stumbling block was that the city did not want to have alcohol, have beer sold at the games. And the Millers ownership group, they said if they're going to go to Nashua, if they're going to go to New City, beer at a baseball game is that's really a big revenue generator. So that was a thing that they were just going to have. So Nashua ended up appropriating the money for the field renovations. They also agreed that beer would be able to be sold at games. So that really ends up being the end of the story. In late 1982, the decision is made. They sign a contract with the city of Nashua. They end up moving the team to Nashua, New Hampshire. They become the Nashua Angels. They stay in Nashua for a few years, and eventually Jerry Miller ends up buying out Ben Cerner and George Como, and they move the franchise to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, those three folks bought the team from Tom Kaiser for $85,000. So think about this and how much things have changed and how much economics have changed in minor league baseball. When Dr. Miller sold the Harrisburg team in 1994, he sold them for $4 million. It's a pretty good return on an investment, I want to say. So that and the Harrisburg ballpark I've never been, by all accounts, it's absolutely gorgeous and a really, really just great place to see a ball game. But for 6 years, City of Holyoke, we had pro ball. Today, of course, the Valley Blue Sox, and this is them when they won their first championship in the New England Collegiate Baseball League in 2017. They won back-to-back championships. They call McKenzie home every summer. It's absolutely great baseball. It's wonderful. I don't realistically ever think that a pro team could ever come back to Holyoke. And again, going back to what I said earlier, if you look at the state of AA ballparks now, and you look at what McKenzie just is, it's a high school stadium. College, Elms College plays there. Legion Ball plays there. It's a great facility. It's not a AA level facility. So I guess I call the article "Miracle on Beech Street" because originally I was like, wow, it's a miracle that they could have ever had a baseball team there. And just going back, it's kind of miraculous that they were able to pull it off at that time. But great memories, great stuff for the city of Holyoke. And I just want to thank all of you for coming and listening to me ramble for the last hour. I see there's lots of questions in the chats, and just want to kind of open up if folks want to share any stories or raise any hands or.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Rocky. How are you?
Good.